Welcome back to Snail's story. How are you today? Is the sky outside your window bright, or is it covered in quiet clouds? Wherever you are, I hope you're safe and ready for a story that will move your heart. Tonight's story begins with an awkward mistake, a young interpreter walking into her CEO's private spa on her first day. From then on, their worlds collided through mistrust, hidden tests, past scars, and conspiracies, until they were forced to face both danger and the walls around their hearts. It is a journey of patience, resilience, betrayal, and ultimately, the courage to love again. If this story touches you, don't forget to like and subscribe to Snail Story, so we can continue to walk together through tales that are slow but true to the heart. Asterisk on her very first morning at Ward Global. Sunlight streamed through the massive glass windows, spilling across the polished marble floor. Claire Donovan clutched her tablet tightly to her chest, hurrying through the vast, maze-like corridor. Every step echoed, only reminding her more painfully that she was late for the most important introductory meeting of her career. She should have been there early. But the overcrowded subway and the time wasted hunting down the right elevator in this 60-story building had already cost her nearly half an hour. Now she felt both anxious and embarrassed. First day and I'm late, this is going to be a terrible first impression, Claire muttered to herself, her heart racing. The more she rushed, the heavier the pressure grew. And, as if things weren't bad enough, a very human need struck hers. She had to find a restroom immediately. Half panicked, her eyes landed on a door with a vague symbol that looked like a restroom sign. Without thinking twice, Claire pushed it open. What met her eyes made her stop dead in her tracks. This was no ordinary restroom. Warm, dim lighting filled the space. Eucalyptus lingered in the air, and gentle classical music floated from hidden speakers. Instead of stalls, there was a dark stone hydrotherapy tub. Neatly folded white towels on a wooden shelf, and soft light reflecting off frosted glass walls. Oh no, this is definitely not a restroom, Claire whispered, though her body was still urging her otherwise. She turned to retreat just as the sound of running water abruptly stopped. Footsteps approached. A tall figure emerged from behind the partition. Claire froze. The man wore nothing but a white towel wrapped around his waist. Broad shoulders glistened, with water droplets trailing down suntanned skin. His face was sharp, angular, his gaze deep and piercing as if it could cut straight through her. She didn't need an introduction to know who he was. Alexander Ward, CEO of Ward Global. The man she had seen hundreds of times in financial magazines and Stern. Photographs in annual reports, but no photograph had ever captured the sheer intensity of his presence. This is the executive spa. His voice was deep, calm, edged with steel. Would you care to explain why you're here? Claire felt her ears burn. Her fingers clenched the tablet so tightly they went numb. I'm sorry. Started today. Tata thought this was the staff restroom. One eyebrow lifted. Staff? I'm Claire Donovan, she blurted quickly, her voice unsteady. The new lead translator. Today's my first day, and I got lost. For a brief second, recognition flickered in his eyes. Ah, Donovan, the one who worked in Geneva. Your file is impressive. Claire bit her lip. She had imagined making her professional debut with poise. But now, all he'd remember was that she was a fool who walked into the wrong room. Alexander glanced at the watch on his wrist. The meeting starts in 5 minutes. I suggest you find the right floor and the right restroom. Of course, yes. Claire backed away, desperate to escape this humiliating scene. But her heel caught on the thick carpet. She stumbled forward, arms flailing. In a moment of panic, her hand shot out and landed against Alexander's solid chest. They both froze. Claire's heart stopped when she realized where her hand was. Alexander, instead of pushing her away, instinctively caught her elbow to steady. Her dots mingled far too close. A strange current shot down Claire's spine. She yanked her hand back as though burned. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." Alexander's eyes remained cool. Yet she caught something fleeting within them, not anger, but an almost involuntary attention. For the briefest moment, his stern expression even hinted at amusement before vanishing. "We'll talk later, Donovan. For now, get to your meeting." Claire bowed her head, face burning, and all but bolted out the door. By the time she finally located the conference room 1 floor below, her heart was still hammering. Everything had unfolded in mere minutes. But one thing was certain: her first day at Ward Global would be nothing like any other job she had ever had. What Claire didn't know was that back in the spa, Alexander Ward remained still for a long while, eyes fixed on the door she had just closed. His usually impassive face betrayed a flicker of unrest. It had been a long time since anyone had managed to stir the iron walls around his heart. That morning's meeting felt like a trial by fire for Claire, one she hadn't prepared for. The moment she stepped into the room, every eye turned toward her, the newcomer, and late at that, the only empty seat was right at the main table, directly beside Alexander Ward. Claire drew in a deep breath, straightened her back, and sat down, trying to ignore the faint whispers behind her. In her mind, the awkward encounter in the CEO's private spa replayed like a slow-motion reel. God, had he told anyone else about it? Alexander betrayed nothing, his face impassive as he focused on the documents before him. His steady baritone filled the room as he introduced Ward Global's expansion plans into 3 new markets: Germany, China, and the Arab world. When the slides displayed the draft agreements, his gaze shifted to Claire. "Donovan," he said, his voice low but commanding enough to halt every pen in motion, "you will handle the full translation of these contracts, German, Mandarin, and Arabic, completed by tomorrow noon." A silence settled across the room. Some managers exchanged doubtful glances, 1 or 2 lips curling in faint smirks. Clearly, such a demand seemed nearly impossible for a newcomer. Claire felt her heart plummet, but she managed to nod. "Yes, I'll do it." The meeting continued, but her mind was already racing with the weight of hundreds of pages in 3 different languages, each requiring absolute precision. She knew she couldn't afford mistakes, not on her first day, and especially not after this morning's humiliation. By afternoon, Claire's desk was buried beneath thick stacks of documents. German legal phrases clashed with Arabic legal codes and Chinese economic terminology, threatening to swallow her whole. Yet, instead of panicking, Claire felt something. Awaken the same focus she had back in Geneva when she handled documents under brutal deadlines. She arranged 3 monitors on her desk, each dedicated to a different language, translating while cross-checking. She scribbled pencil notes about cultural nuances, a German phrase that sounded too harsh, a Chinese idiom that would offend if translated literally, an Arabic legal construct that could easily be misinterpreted. She worked relentlessly, skipping lunch, her desk lamp still glowing long after most of the office had gone dark. By nearly 8 p.m., she was sipping cold coffee, nerves taut as violin strings. And yet beneath the fatigue, something shimmered within her, a fierce determination to prove she belonged. The next morning, at exactly 11:55, Claire stood at the CEO's office door, clutching the completed files. She inhaled, then knocked. "Come in," came Alexander's voice. He sat behind a walnut desk, posture straight, the silver of his watch glinting under soft light. When Claire placed the documents down, he checked his watch. 5 minutes early. "I wanted to give you enough time to review," Claire replied, keeping her voice calm. Alexander flipped through page after page. Claire stood motionless, heart pounding like a drum. She saw his eyes scanning swiftly, the furrow between his brows easing, then tightening again. Each time he lingered on a section, her chest clenched at last. He set the file down. Silence stretched, and Claire nearly forgot to breathe. "Your technical skill matches your record," Alexander said slowly. "No critical errors." Claire's shoulders dropped, relief so intense she almost laughed, though all she did was nod slightly. "Thank you, sir." His gaze locked onto hers, deep, unreadable. But translating on paper is different from handling real-time pressure. "I want to see how you perform without preparation." Claire blinked. "You mean tomorrow you'll join the online meeting with our Japanese investors? Real-time interpretation, no scripts." Her heart leaped to her throat. She knew this would be far harder than the contracts she'd just finished. But in Alexander's eyes, she sensed something unusual. Not just challenge, but curiosity. Almost as if he were waiting to see what she was capable of. "Yes, sir," she answered, her voice firmer than she expected. Alexander gave a single nod, dismissing her. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Donovan." She glanced back. Yes. His eyes lingered on her face, softer for the briefest instant. "Well done." Claire smiled faintly, bowed her head, and stepped out. Only once the door closed behind her did she realize her heart was still trembling. A short phrase, but coming from Alexander Ward, it carried the weight of a promise. In that moment, Claire understood that these harsh tests weren't merely about skill. Somewhere behind the iron walls of Alexander's heart, he had given her an opening, a chance to step inside. The next morning, Claire arrived earlier than usual. She sat alone in her small office, preparing for the online meeting with Japanese investors. No scripts, no notes. Only her ears, her memory, and her skill with language. She recalled Alexander's words from yesterday, simultaneous interpretation. No script beforehand. It had sounded like a command, yet there had been something in his tone, a challenge, as if he wanted to push her to the edge and see if she would fall. Claire drew a deep breath and closed her eyes for a few seconds. She had done this before, back in Geneva, interpreting during an emergency conference while dozens of officials argued heatedly. She had survived then. This time, she told herself, she would too. At exactly 9 a.m., the main conference room lit. Up on the large screen, the Japanese investors appeared, formal and composed. Alexander sat at the center, hands resting on the table, his sharp gaze missing nothing. Claire sat to his right, headset snug against her ears. Pen in hand, though she wasn't writing a single note. The meeting began. Alexander spoke in English, his pace quick, packed with financial jargon. Claire instantly rendered his words into Japanese, her voice steady, rhythm smooth. Her sentences flowed almost in parallel with his. The first few minutes felt like walking a tightrope. The investors stared intently at the screen, and Alexander didn't so much as glance at her. Gradually, however, their expressions softened, one or two nodding subtly. Then Alexander shifted tactics. He deliberately slipped in rare phrases, layered with metaphor. Claire stiffened. She realized he was testing her again, this time right. In front of their partners, in that split second, her mind raced. A literal translation would sound obscure, even misleading. She had to decide quickly. She chose adaptation, preserving the meaning while reshaping it into something culturally appropriate for the Japanese. Audience. Her words came out fluent and complete. A brief silence followed on the other side of the screen. Then the lead investor broke into a rare smile. "Very clear. Thank you," he said in Japanese. Claire exhaled in relief. But at once, Alexander shifted again, throwing out a newly coined technology term she hadn't seen in any prep material. Without hesitation, she drew on memory, pulling an equivalent phrase she'd encountered in an international article. This time, Alexander's eyes flicked toward her. Just for a second, but enough for Claire to catch the faintest hint of surprise and something else. Something that felt like silent recognition. The meeting lasted over 2 hours. By the end, as everyone gathered their notes and logged off, Claire slipped off her headset, palms damp with sweat. She was exhausted, yet relief washed over her. "Donovan," Alexander's voice came from behind. She turned. He was still seated, expression unreadable. "You changed my phrasing during that presentation." Her heart skipped. "I only adjusted slightly to suit the Japanese investors. A direct translation would have sounded too harsh." He was quiet for a long moment. Then the corner of his mouth twitched. "Risky, but correct." Claire blinked in surprise. The praise caught her off guard, and she had to suppress the smile tugging at her lips. "I believe not all language can be translated with words alone. Sometimes you have to translate attitude, culture." Alexander tilted his head, his gaze boring deeper into her. "Most interpreters wouldn't dare. You did." The words were simple, but to Claire they carried weight. For the first time, she didn't feel like just the new employee trying to prove herself. She felt seen. That afternoon, when she returned to her desk, whispers circulated about the morning meeting. One colleague passing by muttered with a smirk, "CEO must be pleased. Wonder what your secret is." Claire only smiled and said nothing. She was used to envy in the workplace. Deep down, she knew she had nothing to prove to them. She had already been acknowledged by Alexander Ward himself. That evening, as she left the building, Claire caught sight of Alexander's silhouette through the glass high above. He was still there, bathed in golden light, unmoving as a statue. She wondered what he thought of her behind that cold exterior. And then another thought flashed across her mind. Perhaps she had stepped into a game she didn't yet fully understand. Inside his office on the top floor, Alexander sat in silence, eyes lingering on Claire Donovan's file. He remembered her focused gaze during the meeting, the calm way she handled each shift. Few people ever dared to reframe his words. She had, and she had been right. A faint chuckle escaped him, rare, almost foreign. She's not easily broken. And that makes her even harder to ignore. After the successful meeting with the Japanese investors, Claire thought things might finally ease up. But she quickly learned, in the workplace, it was never just about the work. The whispers grew louder. The CEO praised her, she must have some secret, a newbie who dares to change Mr. Ward's words and doesn't get fired. The words weren't thrown directly at her face, but they were spoken loud enough for Claire to hear every time she passed by. She chose silence, pouring her energy into her tasks. But not everyone was willing to accept her presence so easily. One afternoon, as Claire returned to her desk, a thick stack of documents landed on it with a thud. It was a cooperation contract with a European supplier, written entirely in archaic German legalese, the kind of document that even veteran translators dreaded. "Mr. Ward wants you to handle this today," came the voice of a senior manager, Marcus Green. His thin smile and gleaming eyes carried nothing friendly. "Today?" Claire frowned. "This would take at least several days." "Oh, I'm just passing along the directive." Marcus shrugged, his satisfaction evident as he watched her. Falter Claire stared at the pile, suspicion gnawing at her. Alexander often set challenges, but never without logic. This order felt wrong. She sat down and began translating. But only a few pages in, she noticed something strange. Sentences repeated, sections contradicted each other, and here and there were deliberate typographical errors. Someone had tampered with the text so that a literal translation would distort the contract and harm the company. Her heartbeat quickened. This wasn't just a test. It was a trap. She spent the entire evening combing through the pages. Her hands scribbled notes non-stop, eyes cross-checking each term. The more she worked, the clearer it became. Someone wanted her to stumble into a catastrophic mistake. By 10 p.m., the office was deserted. Only Claire remained, sitting under the dim glow of her desk lamp, eyes burning with fatigue but unyielding. Resolve, she would not let herself break. The next morning, Claire carried the translated draft into the CEO's office. Alexander looked up as she entered, his sharp eyes immediately catching the exhaustion on her face. "The contract I received," Claire began, laying the papers on his desk, "contained many irregularities. I translated it, but I also flagged clauses that could be harmful. I don't believe this was the official version." Alexander's brow arched. He flipped through several pages, then paused. His expression darkened. "You're certain?" His voice was low. "Absolutely," Claire replied. "There are duplicated clauses, intentional errors, and wording that could be easily misinterpreted regarding financial obligations. If I had translated literally, Ward Global might have faced serious risk." For several seconds, Alexander was silent, fingers tapping lightly on the desk. Then he looked up, his gaze piercing hers. "Who handed this to you?" "Marcus Green," she answered steadily. For a fleeting moment, Alexander's face turned to ice. "I see." He closed the file, his tone decisive. "You did well, Donovan. Very well." Claire blinked in surprise. It wasn't just that he accepted her work, he praised her outright, instantly, which was rare. That afternoon, during an internal leadership meeting, Alexander spoke unexpectedly. "The European supplier contract has been reviewed. Thanks to Donovan, we avoided a clause that could have cost us millions." The room went silent. Dozens of eyes swung toward Claire, a mixture of astonishment and resentment. Marcus Green's face shifted, his composure cracking. Claire's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression calm. She had no desire to look triumphant. Still, deep inside, she knew she had just passed one of the harshest trials, not only from Alexander, but from the corporate battlefield itself. When the meeting ended, Claire gathered her papers. Alexander passed by, pausing beside her. His voice was low, meant only for her ears. "Here, not everyone wants you to succeed, but you've proven yourself. Remember, don't let them break your focus." Claire looked up, meeting his eyes. For the first time, she saw something in them that resembled protection, not just challenge. "Thank you, sir," she whispered. Alexander gave a small nod before striding away, his tall frame disappearing around the corridor's corner. Claire remained seated, her mind tangled. From the spa encounter to the tense meetings, and now this unveiled trap, each moment felt like another rung on a ladder, pulling her closer to the enigmatic center that was Alexander Ward. She wondered, was this merely a series of professional tests or the beginning of something far more complicated? A few days before the gala, Claire was assigned to prepare a bilingual portfolio on Ward Global's history of philanthropy. Seemed like routine work, translating annual reports and donation lists, until, while reviewing files, she stumbled upon an old press clipping. The article was dated 5 years ago. Its headline was stark: "CEO Alexander Ward loses wife and daughter in research facility explosion." Claire froze at her desk. The accompanying photo showed a younger Alexander, caught among a crowd of reporters. His expression in that picture was not cold, not commanding, but hollow, emptied by grief. The article described sabotage, stolen corporate data, and, most devastating of all, Rebecca Ward, his wife, and Emily, their 4-year-old daughter, had been inside the facility when it exploded. Claire raised a hand to her mouth. For the first time, the pieces began to fit. His distance, his icy demeanor, the merciless trials he set for his employees, perhaps it all traced back to that night. She closed the file without telling anyone, but from that moment, an unshakable sense of empathy stirred inside her. The night of the gala arrived. Ward Global's grand hall glittered like a palace. Crystal lights shimmered across the marble floor. Violin melodies floated above waves of laughter and conversation. Claire, in a midnight blue gown, moved gracefully through the crowd in her role as language aide for international guests. She spotted Alexander from afar, tall and imposing in a tuxedo, gliding through the crowd as if born to be its center. But Claire, knowing what she knew now, saw something different. Behind the perfect facade was a void no one else could see. All evening, she worked diligently, translating greetings for German guests, assisting a group of Chinese investors. Yet her eyes, involuntarily, kept tracking Alexander. She noticed the detail no one else did. Whenever a server offered champagne, he declined. His fingers clutched a glass of water instead, his shoulders stiffening. And for a fleeting second, the hands that once seemed so steady trembled. Claire's heart clenched. The article's words echoed in her mind without thinking. When Alexander stepped out onto the balcony, Claire followed. Outside, the night air carried the scent of jasmine. City lights sprawled endlessly below. Alexander stood alone at the railing, tall and commanding, yet unmistakably solitary dot. Claire approached, stopping a few steps away. "Mr. Ward." T turned briefly, his gaze reverting to its usual chill. "You should be inside. T, the international guests might need you." "I've arranged things," Claire replied softly. Then, after a pause, "You don't drink champagne." Alexander froze. A flicker crossed his eyes. Surprise, perhaps. He didn't answer right away, only turned back to the skyline. "Not the kind of drink I need," he said, voice low and clipped. Claire pressed no further. She already understood, thanks to that article. She stood beside him in silence for a few moments, then murmured, "Some losses need no words for people too." "See?" This time, Alexander looked at her longer. In those dark eyes, she glimpsed not just guardedness, but a hint of astonishment, as if he hadn't expected her to pierce the armor. Neither spoke again. The breeze stirred, lifting the hem of Claire's gown. And in that silence, there was more weight than any conversation could hold. At last, Alexander said quietly, "Don't concern yourself, Donovan. Some things are buried." Claire nodded, but inside, she knew, wounds that deep were never truly buried. And she knew, too, that in that moment, she had glimpsed something rare and real in Alexander Ward. Not the untouchable CEO, but a man, still learning how to live with pain. When they returned to the ballroom, the glittering lights, the music, the laughter carried on unchanged. No one noticed what had passed outside. But for Claire, the evening marked a turning point. She was no longer just working for Alexander Ward. She had taken a small step into the hidden world he guarded from everyone else. After the gala, the atmosphere at Ward Global remained tense, but different. Claire noticed something had shifted in the way Alexander looked at her. It wasn't openly soft, but neither was it as cold as before. He still spoke sparingly, but each time those dark eyes lingered on her, Claire felt she was being weighed as something more than just another employee. That feeling warmed her and unsettled her. The following week, news swept through headquarters. Sophie Lang was back. To collaborate with Ward Global, everyone seemed to know the name except Claire. Whispers floated around. Sophie had once been a close partner, a longtime acquaintance of Alexander's. Some even hinted at more, that she had been the only one able to make him smile after his tragedy years ago. When Claire heard it, chest tightened. She couldn't explain why, but the name alone sent a ripple of unease through her. That afternoon, during a strategy meeting, Claire met Sophie for the first time. Sophie entered with golden curls cascading down her shoulders, a chic beige dress, and a confident smile. She walked straight to Alexander and embraced him lightly, like an old friend. Alexander didn't refuse. He simply nodded in greeting. But Claire noticed his eyes softened. Sophie addressed him with a familiar ease no one else in the company would dare use. It's been far too long. Sitting a few seats away, Claire felt a pang in her chest. For a fleeting moment, she felt like an outsider gazing into a world of belonging that had existed long before her. The meeting began. Sophie participated as a consultant for the European expansion project. Claire served as interpreter. Strangely, throughout the session, Sophie repeatedly directed attention toward Claire. Her questions weren't overtly hostile, but laced with barbs. "Claire, are you absolutely certain this translation is correct? I've seen entire contracts collapse over a single mistake." Or, "Claire, can you guarantee this phrasing doesn't dilute the essence of what Alexander intended?" Each time, Claire responded calmly. But the intent was clear. Sophie was subtly trying to undermine her in front of Alexander. When the meeting ended, Sophie approached Claire with her sweet smile. "You must be Claire Donovan, the newcomer who's caught Alex's attention in some way." Claire hesitated. "I only do the work assigned to me." "Oh, of course." Sophie tilted her head, the chill in her eyes barely masked by politeness. "I just wanted to remind you, it's not easy to hold your ground here, especially if you seem to be favored." With that, Sophie turned and left, leaving Claire weighted down with unease. That night, as Claire worked late, Alexander appeared, unexpectedly at her door. "You're still here?" His voice was low, even. "I wanted to double-check a few reports," Claire answered. He stepped inside, stopping at her desk. "You did well today. I know Sophie isn't exactly easy." Claire looked up, startled. "You noticed too." The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "Sophie is intelligent, but blunt. Don't let her words rattle you." Claire nodded, though doubt lingered. She was about to ask more, but Alexander had already turned. At the doorway, he paused, his tone softer. "I trust you." The door closed, leaving Claire shaken in ways she couldn't name. In the days that followed, Sophie's presence grew more prominent. She was often by Alexander's side in meetings at working lunches. Always polite, she nonetheless made it clear she knew him better than anyone else, how he preferred his coffee black, his habits in negotiations, his routines. Claire, standing at the edges, could only keep to her tasks. But each time she saw Sophie and Alexander exchange words like old confidants, something inside her ached, sharp and small. One afternoon, while Claire prepared translations for the European project, Sophie appeared at her office door. "So many documents," Sophie said lightly, her hand brushing the stack of papers. "I remember when Alex used to let me handle this side of things. He trusted me completely." Claire's pen halted. "Now, Mr. Ward has assigned it to me." Sophie smiled, but her eyes glinted. "Yes, but are you sure he trusts you completely? Alex isn't the kind of man who trusts easily." With that, Sophie left, leaving behind a heavy silence. Claire sat frozen, her hand trembling slightly over the page. The old article resurfaced in her mind, the one about Alexander's tragedy. He had once lost trust in the world. Could he ever truly trust someone new like her? Or would he retreat into the comfort of someone familiar, like Sophie? For the first time, quiet fear began to take root in Claire's heart, that she was merely an intruder in a world that already had a place reserved for someone else, and Sophie Lang, it seemed, knew that all too well and was determined to remind her at every turn. Paris in April wore a gentleness that was hard to describe. Fresh green trees lined the Champs-Élysées. Cars slid by under a sky of pale sunlight. Claire sat by the company car's window, quietly taking in the view. It was her first time in Paris, not as a tourist, but as a representative of Ward Global. Beside her, Alexander Ward sat silent, his expression unchanging, eyes fixed on the documents in his hand. The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was like a thin veil. Claire had the feeling that with the smallest movement, she might pierce through and glimpse what lay hidden behind it. The first day of work went smoothly. Claire translated seamlessly in the negotiations, shifting fluidly between French, German, and English. The European partners were impressed, nodding their approval more than once. Alexander never voiced praise, but each time his eyes flicked toward her after she cleared a particularly tricky section. Claire felt warmed that afternoon in the hotel lobby where the conference was held. Claire was caught in an unexpected situation. Thomas Laurent, a French businessman, approached her after the session. He smiled broadly, struck up conversation in rich French, complimented her skills, and even rested his hand lightly on her arm as he spoke. Claire politely withdrew, answering with a courteous smile, but Laurent's gaze lingered too intently, making her uneasy. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Alexander standing not far away. His eyes darkened, his jaw tightened, and then he strode forward, voice firm. "Donovan, we have matters to discuss." "Excuse us, Laurent." Alexander placed a hand at the small of her back, guiding her away. The touch was brief but strong, protective, and carrying an invisible claim. Claire's heart pounded wildly. She didn't dare look back, only followed. In silence, that night when they returned to the hotel, the elevator suddenly stopped midway. The lights flickered, then went out, leaving only dim emergency glow. The cramped space turned heavy, pressing in. Alexander pressed the call button, calmly reporting, "They said it will take about an hour to fix." Claire tried to breathe evenly, telling herself there was nothing to fear but the confined air. The closeness made her heartbeat race. Alexander leaned against the wall, eyes on her. "You seem uneasy." "Not really. It's just I didn't think I'd end up stuck in an elevator with you." The words slipped out before Claire realized how they could be taken. Her face flushed. The corner of Alexander's mouth lifted. A rare smile. "Nor did I. But it seems you often find yourself in unexpected situations around me." The remark pulled her back to their first meeting in his private spa. Claire laughed softly, the tension easing. After a pause, she dared ask, "Today, why were you upset when Laurent spoke to me?" Alexander turned, his gaze dark as the Paris night. "You already know why." Claire froze, breath catching. "Do you really care about that?" He stepped closer, closing the distance until only inches remained. His voice dropped, almost a whisper. "Since the day you walked into that spa, you've been breaking down walls I built around myself. I've tried pushing you back every way. I could, but you don't retreat. And that makes it impossible for me to ignore you anymore." Claire's chest tightened as his hand lifted, brushing her cheek. The warmth of his touch made her tremble. "Claire," for the first time, he spoke her name, not Donovan. "You make me want to feel again." After so many years, the world seemed to hold its breath. Claire raised her eyes to his. What she saw was not the cold CEO, but a man torn between fear and longing. The fragile distance was about to vanish. When the intercom crackled, "The elevator will resume shortly. Please remain calm." Alexander stepped back half a pace, his face shuddered once more. Claire lowered her head, her heart still racing. When the doors opened, they walked out as if nothing had happened. But Claire knew an invisible door had. Opened the next day, the air between them had changed. They remained professional, yet Alexander's glances lingered longer. And Claire's cheeks warmed each time their eyes met. But Sophie Lang noticed. When the conference ended, Sophie suddenly appeared in Paris, citing her involvement in the European project. She greeted Alexander with familiarity, letting her fingers brush his as she handed over documents. Claire, standing nearby, forced a polite smile while something inside her tightened. Sophie tilted her head, her gaze sliding toward Claire with a fleeting sharpness. Paris is wonderful, isn't it? But newcomers will never truly understand the city the way someone who's been here long enough does. Claire heard the words and felt the sting. It wasn't just about Paris. It was about Alexander. And for the first time, the tender spark in her heart ran straight into a wall. Sophie Lang, the woman who belonged to Alexander's past, but now stood squarely in his present. After the Paris trip, everything at Ward Global seemed to slip back into routine. But for Claire, nothing felt routine anymore. From that charged moment in the elevator, from the trembling brush of his hand, she knew Alexander Ward had changed. And yet walls remained between them, the unyielding line between boss and subordinate, and the shadow of Sophie Lang. One morning, Claire was handed a set of merger contracts from Richard Hale, CEO of a small tech company preparing to be absorbed by Ward Global. The bundle stretched hundreds of pages, drafted in German, Chinese, and Arabic. She sat down to translate. But by the 30th page, she froze. A German phrase, oddly familiar. Then, in the Chinese section, the same expression surfaced. And in the Arabic version, she saw the exact same structure mirrored again. Her heart lurched. The memory of that article from 5 years ago flashed back. It had described code phrases, secret word patterns used by the saboteurs responsible for the research facility explosion. Investigators had once cracked those patterns, and now, here they were, embedded in a merger contract. Claire lowered her pen, her hands trembling slightly. Could it be? Was the explosion 5 years ago? And this merger attempt, threads of the same unseen hand. All day she worked like a taut wire. She checked, rechecked, marked every suspicious phrase. Logic screamed she should bring this to Alexander immediately. But fear nodded her. If she was wrong, everything could collapse. Late at night, Claire knocked on Alexander's office door. He looked up, his dark eyes fixing on her weary face. "What is it?" His tone was deep, but gentler than usual. The Hale contract Claire swallowed. "I believe there's a serious problem." She spread the pages on his desk, pointing at the patterns. "Do you see? These are identical to the codes from the investigation 5 years ago. I think Hale's company is just a front. They're trying to infiltrate Ward Global from within." Alexander was silent. His gaze dropped to the papers, then back to her. His eyes darkened, his face unreadable. "You're certain, Donovan?" Claire drew a breath. "I can't claim absolute certainty, but the signs are undeniable. I think these may be the very people behind your tragedy." The room grew heavy with silence. The door suddenly opened. Sophie Lang stepped in, a stack of reports in hand. Her gaze swept over Claire and the documents. "What's going on?" she asked lightly, though her tone carried sharp edges. Alexander hesitated, but Claire spoke. "I just discovered coded phrases in Hale's contract. They match those used in the sabotage case from 5 years ago." I believe Sophie gave a soft laugh, cutting her off. "Claire, you haven't been here long. Merger contracts are full of strange phrases that are perfectly legitimate in context. Are you sure you're not overreaching?" The words sliced through Claire like a knife. Keeping her voice steady, she answered, "I cross-checked them. These phrases are exact matches to the investigation records. It cannot be coincidence." Sophie stepped closer, placing her hand on the desk, her tone dropping. "Be careful, Claire. An accusation like this could sink the entire deal if you're wrong." Claire held her gaze. "And if I'm right?" For a moment, the two women stood locked in silent battle, neither yielding. Alexander rose, walking to the window, his silence stretching. Finally, he turned, voice low and resolute. "Donovan, continue gathering evidence. I want absolute confirmation before we act." Claire nodded, but her chest ached. He hadn't said, I believe you. Only bring me proof. Sophie smiled faintly, glancing at Claire. Good. Let's not confuse personal matters with company business. Claire said nothing. But inside, a fire lit. She would uncover the truth at any cost. That night, back in her rented apartment, Claire spread the documents again, her hands trembling. Each repeated phrase felt like reopening an old scar. More than ever, she saw it. Someone had been weaving this plot for years, and now the target was all of Ward. Global. If she failed, Alexander would lose everything. If she was right, then he was about to face the same dark forces that had already stolen his past. Claire closed her eyes, whispering to herself, I won't let it happen. Not again. And in that instant, she knew. This was no longer about a job. It was a battle to protect Ward Global and the man her heart was slowly turning toward. The grand conference hall of Ward Global glittered beneath crystal chandeliers. At the long wooden table, international investors sat in a row, their faces grave. Before them lay the thick merger contract prepared by Richard Hale. The air was so tense, so solemn, that even the rustle of turning pages cut through like blades. Claire sat to Alexander's right, headset ready. Across the table, Richard Hale wore a confident smile, occasionally shooting Alexander smug glances. Nearby, Sophie Lang sat among the observers, her turquoise dress catching the light. Her eyes fixed on Alexander, Claire inhaled deeply. Her heart pounded, but she knew she couldn't falter. Everything she had uncovered in the contracts, every suspicion tied to the explosion 5 years ago today, was the chance to bring it all to light. The meeting began. Richard spoke at length about the benefits of the deal. Claire translated smoothly into German, then Chinese, then Japanese. At first, everything proceeded normally. But when Richard began citing technical clauses embedded in the German draft, Claire recognized them instantly. Those were the very coded phrases she had discovered. She glanced at Alexander. He sat immobile, his face unreadable. But when their eyes met, she caught the flicker of anticipation. Claire adjusted her mic, translating into Chinese for the investors. Mr. Hale speaks of absolute guarantee, but the legal phrase he used actually means permanent transfer of assets. The room rippled with unease. A Chinese investor frowned, whispering urgently to a colleague. Richard hesitated, then forced a laugh. Just a common expression. Claire kept her voice even, though her pulse raced. She moved on to the German draft, deliberately stressing the ambiguity. Here, Mr. Hale used Verpflichtung ohne Einschränkung, meaning unconditional obligation, if signed. Ward Global would assume unlimited financial liability. 1. German investor immediately cut in. Why would such a clause exist in a merger contract? This is a severe disadvantage. Richard broke into a sweat, his eyes darting to Claire. She's overinterpreting. Calmly, Claire lifted the marked pages. I've highlighted them. These phrases appear identically in the German, Chinese, and Arabic drafts. And they match documents from the sabotage investigation 5 years ago. The room erupted. Investors began muttering loudly, some pulling out phones to call their legal teams. Alexander rose to his feet, his voice thunderous. Richard Hale, do you have an explanation? Richard's face drained of color. T tried to steady himself. This is just a misunderstanding of language. You can't destroy a deal based on one interpreter's opinion. Before Alexander could respond, Sophie suddenly spoke. Her tone was sweet, but her eyes flickered. Alex, perhaps Claire is being overly cautious. I reviewed this contract myself, and it looked perfectly fine. The entire room froze. Claire's blood ran cold. Sophie had known. Alexander turned, his gaze slicing like steel. You said you reviewed this contract before I received it. Sophie faltered too late. Her silence was answer enough. One of the German investors shot to his feet. This proved someone tampered with the preparation process. Claire clenched her fists. Quoi? She watched Sophie's face pale, her poised smile shatter. Alexander moved slowly toward her, his voice like ice. Sophie, you were someone I once trusted. But if you sided with Hale, Sophie cut him off, her voice sharp, bitter. You never truly trusted anyone. Alex, I only wanted to show you that you can't place your faith so easily in someone new like Claire. She'll disappoint you too. In the end, Claire's heart tightened, but she lifted her chin, refusing to look away. Alexander stood silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, each word deliberate, etched in the air. Perhaps I lost trust for too long. But today, Claire saved this company from a trap. She hasn't disappointed me. You have. Sophie's eyes glistened. She said nothing more, then turned and walked out of the room. Afterward, legal and security teams took Richard Hale for questioning. The investors applauded, several shaking Alexander's hand and commending Claire's sharp instincts. When the hall emptied, leaving only Alexander and Claire, the atmosphere softened. He stood before her, silent for a long moment. You did what none of us caught, he said, his voice hoarse. You saved Ward Global. And more than that, you touched a part of my past I thought would haunt me forever. Claire smiled faintly, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I just did what my heart wouldn't let me ignore. I don't want anyone to suffer the kind of loss you did. Alexander looked at her, his gaze no longer that of a cold CEO, but of a man grateful and terrified of losing again. And in that moment, Claire understood. The trust he had just placed in her was not only about the company, but about his heart. That night, after the stormy boardroom showdown, Ward Global's building grew unusually quiet. The long corridors glowed under soft amber lights, footsteps echoing faintly. Claire sat in her small office, sorting through the translated documents that the investigation team had just taken away. She was exhausted, yet sleep wouldn't come. The pages still seemed to cling to her hands, the coded phrases replaying in her mind. She knew she had done the right thing, but also that she had stepped too far into Alexander Ward's story. Far enough that there was no turning back. A knock sounded at the door. She looked up. Alexander stood there, jacket off, tie loosened. The hard edges of his usual composure had softened, replaced with weariness and relief. Mr. Ward. Claire whispered, her heart quickening. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. In the dimly lit room, his tall figure cast a long shadow. Claire, he said, calling her name as naturally as breathing for the first time. Thank you. Claire pressed her lips together. I only did my job. No, he shook his head, moving closer. You did more than that. You didn't just save Ward Global from a takeover. His voice faltered. You saved me from my own fear. Her eyes stung with heat. Alexander stopped at her desk, leaning down, his gaze locking onto hers. For 5 years, I built walls of steel around myself. I thought if I trusted no one, I'd never feel pain again. But the truth is, I only imprisoned myself. He drew a deep breath, speaking slowly, deliberately. Claire Donovan, you tore those walls down, not with force, but with patience and honesty. And now, I don't want to hide anymore. Claire's heart surged, tears slipping down her cheeks even as she smiled through them. What are you saying? That I trust you. His hand closed firmly over hers, and that I love you. The world stilled. Claire looked into the face once so cold, now filled with raw sincerity. And in that moment, all her fears dissolved. She squeezed his hand, whispering, I love you too. Not just the stern CEO, but the man who endured loss, who found the strength to rise again, and who is now brave enough to open his heart. Alexander closed the distance, his lips brushing hers. Their first kiss was gentle yet powerful, carrying the weight of a promise. From this day on, they would walk together, no longer boss and employee, but two souls who had found each other through ruin and through trust. A few months later, the Pre-New Salette, the press hall of Ward Global gleamed under bright lights. Cameras flashed as Alexander Ward and Claire Donovan stood side by side, announcing the Global Language Foundation, a project dedicated to supporting interpretation and language education. For children in underserved regions, Claire addressed the audience in 3 languages, her words drawing silence and then thunderous applause. Alexander watched her, no longer hiding the pride in his eyes. After the conference, they stepped onto the balcony high above the city. The New York sky stretched wide in blue, the wind brisk around them. Alexander stood close, holding her hand. "You brought life back to me," he said quietly. Claire rested her head against his shoulder, smiling. "No, you opened your own heart. I was only here to remind you that trust still exists." They stood there, hand in hand, gazing at the glittering city below. A story that had begun with an awkward intrusion into a private spa. Through trials, suspicions, and conspiracies, now closed with a simple truth. When two hearts dare to trust, love will always find its way. Asterisk, perhaps. The most beautiful thing we can take from tonight's story is that trust is never lost forever. Even after grief, betrayal, and fear, two hearts can still find each other when they dare to believe again. Thank you for staying with Snail's story until the very end. If this story touched something in your heart, please leave a comment and share your thoughts. I'd love to read them. And don't forget to like and subscribe, so every week we can keep walking together through stories that are slow but true to the heart.